When people talk about favoritism in families, they make it sound like something you can measure, like love divided into halves or affection that shifts by degrees. But in my family, it wasn't math. It was atmosphere. You didn't need to count to know who the sun always shined on. You could just feel it in the room. My name is Dr. Audrey Collins. I'm 26 years old, and I graduated from medical school the same year as my twin sister Jessica. We shared the same birthday, the same GPA, and for a long time, the same dream to heal people. But somehow, I spent most of my life learning how to heal from people too. Growing up, Jess and I were identical in the way strangers often couldn't tell us apart. But inside, we couldn't have been more different. She was radiant, the kind of person who filled a space without trying. She had a laugh that made everyone turn away of talking, that made people lean closer. I was quieter, steadier. The one who stayed up late studying, the one who remembered to pack extra pens for both of us before an exam, the one who fixed her notes when she got distracted. Our parents adored her for that radiance. They said it wasn't favoritism, it was just natural affection. But when natural affection always tilts toward one side, the imbalance starts to feel like gravity. I remember being 16 and overhearing my mother on the phone with one of her friends. "Jessica's just got that spark," she said. Audrey's the serious one, of course, but Jess, she's special. That word special stuck in my throat for years. Still, I told myself it didn't matter. I loved my sister. We were a team, even if the spotlight only had room for one of us. And when we both got accepted into medical school, I thought finally something they couldn't divide. We'd earned the same place in the same program on the same day. But I should have known better. Medical school was brutal. Sleepless nights, endless exams, the constant hum of pressure that made you forget who you were outside of the hospital walls. We both struggled, but Jess had a way of making struggle look glamorous. Her breakdowns were Instagram captions about resilience. Mine were silent collapses at 2 a.m. over cold coffee. I worked 2 part-time jobs to cover expenses our parents said they couldn't quite manage right now. Jess didn't have to. They insisted on helping her, said stress made her grades drop and she needed support. When I asked if I could get the same, Mom said gently, "You're so independent, Audrey. You don't need us like she does." I didn't argue. I just nodded because that's what I'd always done. I kept pushing, convincing myself that one day the effort would speak for itself, that love could be earned if I worked hard enough. And for a while, I believed it was working. I got into neurosurgery research early. I co-authored a paper that was cited in one of our national journals. My professors praised my discipline. Even Jess started telling people Audrey's the genius of the family. But our parents never heard it that way. When Jess got a B+, they called her brilliant. When I got an award, they said, "That's nice, honey," and asked if I'd heard how well Jessica's residency interviews were going. We graduated on the same day, 2 identical gowns. 2 identical smiles that hid 2 very different hearts. I remember standing on that stage clutching my diploma, scanning the audience for my parents. They waved enthusiastically, but not at me. Their camera was pointed 1 row over at Jess. I laughed it off because what else could I do? It was always going to be like that, right? But what happened 2 weeks later changed everything. We'd just come home for a family dinner. A small celebration, Mom said. Nothing fancy, though the catered meal and balloons said otherwise. I walked into the dining room and froze. A giant banner hung across the wall. "Congratulations, Jessica debt-free and ready to shine." I blinked. Debt-free? Everyone was clapping, hugging her, laughing. My parents handed her an envelope with a gold ribbon tied around it. Jess opened it and gasped dramatically. "Oh my God, you paid off my loans." My mother beamed. "All of them, sweetheart. You deserve a fresh start." I felt my throat tighten. I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. "That's amazing," I said, trying to sound casual. "You paid them off?" "All of them," my father nodded proudly. "Of course. We didn't want Jessica starting her career burdened with debt. It's time she focused on her future." I swallowed hard. We both graduated, we both have debt. The room fell silent for a split second, the kind of silence that's louder than shouting. Then my mother said almost lightly, "Well, you've always been so financially responsible, Audrey. You've managed everything so well on your own. We knew you'd be fine." Jess's smile faltered. She looked between us, her face pale. "Wait, what? You didn't. It's fine, I interrupted, forcing a smile. It's fine, really. But it wasn't. I excused myself before anyone could see my eyes blur. In the bathroom, I gripped the sink until my knuckles turned white. My reflection looked foreign, the same face as my sister's, but filled with something she didn't have to carry: resentment. I wasn't jealous of the money, I was jealous of the message, the gesture that said you are worth saving, and you are not. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about every subtle way they'd told me I was less. Every "you'll manage," every "you don't need help," every moment I'd mistaken neglect for trust. At 3 a.m. my phone buzzed, a text from Jess. I didn't know they were doing that. I swear. I thought it was for both of us. I typed back, "Don't worry about it." But she did. The next morning, she showed up at my apartment. Her hair still damp, face pale. "Audrey, this is messed up," she said. "You worked harder than anyone I know. You don't deserve this." I shrugged, pretending it didn't matter. It's not about deserving, it's just how it's always been. She looked at me for a long time. "You always let them do this," she whispered. "Why?" "Because I thought if I accepted less gracefully enough one day, they'd see me as enough." But I didn't say that out loud. 3 weeks later, everything changed, not because of me, but because life has a strange way of bringing justice when you've stopped expecting it. At our medical school's alumni ceremony, my mentor, Dr. Vivian Fleming, pulled me aside. She was one of those women who carried quiet authority, the kind who didn't raise her voice because she didn't need to. She looked at me over her glasses and said, "Audrey, I need you to sit near the stage tonight." "Why?" I asked, confused. She smiled. "You'll see." The auditorium filled with doctors, families, and donors. My parents and Jessica were there, of course, Mom in her perfect pearl necklace, Dad checking his phone, Jess whispering encouragement to me. Halfway through the ceremony, Dr. Fleming walked onto the stage holding a folder. "Every year," she began, "we honor one graduating doctor who has shown extraordinary promise, resilience, and dedication to research and patient care. This year's Patterson Fellowship recipient is someone who represents the very best of what this profession stands for." She paused and I felt my pulse race. Then she said my name. The applause was thunderous. I felt dizzy standing up, walking toward the stage as if in a dream. Dr. Fleming hugged me. "You earned this," she whispered. The Patterson Fellowship wasn't just an award, it was a fully funded research residency with loan forgiveness. Everything I had been struggling under vanished in a single sentence. When I turned back toward the crowd, I saw Jess smiling through tears, and behind her, my parents frozen in stunned silence. For a moment, I didn't breathe. The world slowed around me, flashes of light from cameras clapping hands blurred into a soft roar. It wasn't pride I felt, not exactly. It was something deeper, quieter, like exhaling after holding your breath for years. When I stepped off the stage, Dr. Fleming pressed my hand. "Let them see what grace looks like," she murmured. And it wasn't until much later that I understood what she meant. I turned toward my family's table. Jess was clapping wildly, tears streaking her cheeks, her expression full of pride. But my parents, they looked like they'd just watched a ghost walk across that stage. After the ceremony, people surrounded me, faculty members, classmates, even strangers offering congratulations. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see my parents standing off to the side, whispering to each other. My father's smile was strained. My mother's eyes darted around as though she couldn't quite make sense of the situation. When I finally approached them, I said softly, "You didn't expect that, did you?" My father cleared his throat. "We're very proud of you," he said, his tone too formal. "That's quite an honor." "An honor," I repeated, trying to keep my voice steady. "Dad, this fellowship clears all my loans. Every cent, just like Jessica's." My mother forced a smile. "Well, that's wonderful, darling. See, we always knew things would work out for you." I nodded slowly. "No, Mom," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Things didn't work out for me. I worked for them." For a brief second, she looked ashamed. But then she did what she always did, smiled through it. Pretended the truth was too uncomfortable to exist. Later that evening at the after-party, Jessica found me outside on the terrace, where the city lights painted the night in gold and silver. She handed me a glass of champagne, her eyes red from crying. "I'm sorry," she said, "for what I asked. For letting them make you feel small." I took a slow sip, staring at the skyline. You didn't make me feel small, Jess. I just kept standing where they told me to. She winced. I know, but it's not right. I looked at her. Really looked at her, the golden twin, the one who had always been loved out loud. She wasn't my enemy. She was a reflection of everything I thought I lacked. It's not your fault, I said gently. We just grew up in a house that measured love in the wrong currency. She bit her lip. I told them it was unfair, she whispered. After dinner that night, Mom said you'd be fine. Dad said you didn't need help because you were stronger. But I knew they were lying to themselves. A tear slipped down her cheek, and I reached over, brushing it away. You know what's funny? I said softly. They thought not helping me would make me stronger. And they were right, just not in the way they imagined. The weeks that followed were strange. My name appeared in local medical journals, university newsletters, even an online feature about the future of neurosurgical research. People I hadn't spoken to in years reached out to congratulate me. But my parents didn't. For almost a month, not a single message. At first, it hurt. I checked my phone more times than I'd like to admit. But as the silence stretched on, I realized something. It wasn't rejection anymore, it was freedom. Then one afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number. When I answered, my father's voice filled the line. Your mother wants to have dinner, he said awkwardly, to celebrate your fellowship. There was a pause long enough to carry every unspoken apology they couldn't form. I could have refused. I could have said I was busy, that I had a life now that didn't need their validation. But part of me, the part that still hoped for some kind of closure, said yes. Dinner was at their favorite restaurant, a place I hadn't been to since before graduation. When I walked in, Mom stood to hug me, her perfume the same as always, soft and floral, almost nostalgic. You look beautiful, she said, eyes flickering with something like guilt. Thanks, I replied. We sat down. Jess joined us too, her expression cautious. The waiter poured wine and small talk filled the air. My parents asked about my research, my move to Boston, the fellowship's travel grant. For a while, it almost felt normal, almost. Then Mom said, You know, your father and I have been thinking about what happened with Jessica's loans. I froze. Dad cleared his throat. We realize it might have seemed unfair. Seemed, I echoed softly. He looked uncomfortable. You have to understand, Audrey, we didn't mean to hurt you. We just wanted to help your sister get on her feet. You were always so capable. Capable doesn't mean invincible, I said. Mom reached for my hand. We're sorry, she said quietly. We should have done better. For the first time, the apology felt real. Not rehearsed, not polished, just human. I nodded. Thank you, I said. And I meant it. But I also knew forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. After dinner, Jess and I walked outside together. The air was cool, the city alive with sound. They're trying, she said. I know, I replied. But it's going to take more than trying. It takes seeing me not just when I succeed, but when I'm hurting. She smiled sadly. You know what's ironic, she asked. They always said you didn't need them, but the truth is they needed you to make themselves feel like good parents. I looked at her surprised. When did you get so wise? She laughed. Probably the moment I realized you were right about everything. We both laughed, then the kind of laugh that releases something you've carried too long. A few weeks later, my parents visited my new apartment. They brought flowers and a framed photo of me in my graduation gown, the first photo of just me they'd ever displayed in their home. My mother placed it carefully on the shelf, her fingers trembling. We wanted you to have this, she said softly. I looked at it for a long moment. The photo was beautiful. I looked strong, peaceful. Thank you, I said, and this time I smiled for real. For the first time, they smiled back, not out of pride, but out of recognition. That night, after they left, I sat alone with the framed photo. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of city lights outside. I realized something then. Forgiveness isn't a moment. It's a process. It's choosing every day not to let old wounds define your reflection. My parents would never undo what they'd done. But maybe that was okay, because I didn't need them to fix it anymore. I'd already rebuilt myself from the ground up, and that I thought was the truest kind of freedom. Months passed, and I began to see life through a new lens, one that wasn't clouded by resentment or hunger for validation. The fellowship moved me to Boston, and my days became filled with long hours in the lab, patient consultations, and moments of quiet awe at the sheer privilege of touching lives through medicine. I loved what I did, but there was still something fragile beneath the surface, a quiet echo that reminded me of who I'd been before I found my strength. Sometimes when I looked out at the Charles River from my apartment balcony, I'd think about that girl in the bathroom mirror gripping the sink while her sister was celebrated for something she'd earned equally. I'd whisper to her across time, "You made it. You didn't have to scream for them to hear you. You just had to rise." The funny thing about success is that when you finally get it, it doesn't feel like revenge. It feels like peace, but also like a soft kind of grief. Because you start to see how much of your journey was built on surviving the very people you wanted to love you most. One morning, I got an email from my department chair, Dr. Fleming. The subject line read, "Congratulations, Dr. Collins." Inside the message was brief. "You've been selected to present your latest research on neural regeneration at the Global Medical Innovations Conference. You'll represent both our program and the fellowship." I couldn't be prouder. I sat staring at the screen, my coffee growing cold beside me. A year ago, I'd been drowning in debt, wondering if I'd ever step out from under the weight of my family's shadow. And now here I was, flying to Switzerland to speak before some of the greatest minds in my field. When I called Jess to tell her, she squealed so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. "Audrey, that's incredible. Mom and Dad are going to lose it." I laughed softly. "Yeah, maybe, but this isn't about them anymore." She grew quiet. "No," she said gently, "it's not. It's about you finally getting what you've always deserved." The conference was held in Geneva. The air there felt different, crisp, clean, alive with ambition. I spent 3 days surrounded by innovation, inspiration, and people who looked at me not as someone's daughter or twin, but as Dr. Collins. On the final evening, I stood on the main stage under a wash of soft blue lights, the auditorium filled with hundreds of people. My presentation flowed effortlessly, every word grounded in the years of sacrifice that had brought me there. When the applause came, it wasn't thunderous, it was steady, deep like a heartbeat. The kind of sound that seeps into your bones and tells you you've done something that matters. Afterward, as I stepped off stage, a woman approached me. She introduced herself as Dr. Naomi Bell, a senior surgeon from Johns Hopkins. "Your talk was extraordinary," she said. "You remind me of myself 20 years ago, hungry, brilliant, and patient. Keep that balance, it's rarer than talent." I smiled, humbled. "Thank you, I'll remember that." That night I walked alone along Lake Geneva, my heels in my hand, the water glimmering under the moonlight. I thought about everything I'd endured, the nights of crying quietly so no one would hear, the endless push to be seen, the countless times I'd swallowed pain just to keep peace. And for the first time, I didn't feel bitterness. I felt gratitude, not for the cruelty, but for what it had forced me to become. When I returned to the States, my parents surprised me. Jess had apparently told them about the conference, and this time they showed up at my apartment unannounced, not with demands or guilt, but with a dinner reservation. "We wanted to celebrate you," Mom said as she handed me a bouquet of lilies. I blinked. "You came all the way to Boston?" Dad smiled sheepishly. "You're not the only one who can travel for work, you know." At dinner, something had shifted between us. There was no awkward silence, no defensive tone, just conversation. They asked about my research, and this time they actually listened. When I spoke, they didn't look distracted or dismissive. They looked proud. After dessert, my mother reached into her purse and handed me a small envelope. "This is for you," she said softly. Inside was a handwritten letter, not typed, not formal, just words shaky and human. "Audrey, for years I thought I understood what love was. I thought it meant protecting the child who needed me most. I see now that I confused need with worth. You were never the one who needed saving, you were the one who kept us all standing. I should have said this long ago, but I'll say it now, I'm sorry. Love, Mom." My chest tightened. I didn't cry, not because I didn't feel it, but because I'd cried enough for all the lost years already. I folded the letter gently and looked at her. "Thank you," I said, and this time it wasn't closure, I felt it was healing. That night, as I walked them to their car, my father turned to me, his expression serious. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think you were cold, that you didn't need us. I see now that you were just tired of proving yourself." I smiled sadly. "I was never cold, Dad. I was just learning how to stop begging for warmth." He nodded slowly, his eyes glistening under the streetlights. "You've taught us more than you know." As they drove away, I stood there in the cool night air, watching their taillights fade into the distance. For the first time, the goodbye didn't feel heavy, it felt like release. Months later, I published my first paper as lead researcher, and when it went viral in medical circles, the first congratulatory call I got was from my mother. She didn't talk about Jessica. She didn't compare or minimize. She just said, "We're so proud of you, Audrey." And maybe that's what growth looks like, not grand gestures, but quiet moments where old wounds stop bleeding. Because in the end, the story wasn't about the loans or the favoritism. It was about learning that love doesn't have to be begged for to be real, and that sometimes the justice you've been waiting for arrives not as revenge but as recognition. I used to think my strength came from enduring pain, but now I know my strength came from refusing to let it define me. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever had to build your worth from the ashes of neglect, I want you to remember this. You don't have to make them see you to be whole. You already are. Sometimes the only way to heal from the past is to stop reaching back for the version of love that broke you.